Resident Evil 7 surprised a lot of people when it launched. It was a bold new, and at the same time old, direction for the series that paid off for Capcom, and 7 has continued to surprise post-launch, with DLC content that, while short, has played with expectations in the best kind of way. We spoke to a number of the creative minds behind Resident Evil 7 at Capcom's headquarters in Osaka a while back, and there were a lot of little details in those chats that, now that all the dust has settled, we thought Resident Evil fans might find interesting even after you finish the game. Enjoy. There are lots of horror movie references in Resident Evil 7, but one thing that didn't make the cut, according to the development team, was an idea to have the player cook some popcorn with a stovetop foil pan, where the foil expands as the popcorn pops. Eventually, the foil would burst and you'd find a key inside. The idea came from the beginning of the film Scream, where Drew Barrymore's character almost sets her house on fire with the same thing. Though, admittedly, she had bigger problems to worry about. Eventually though, the idea to add the popcorn maker to Resident Evil 7 was cut because the development team couldn't be sure that international audiences would fully understand the concept, given that it's a little bit niche. They were actually kind of surprised that I got the reference and they joked about putting it back in, so maybe one to watch out for in Resident Evil 8, I guess. Other features that were cut included zombies that reacted to human breathing, which would have required players to hold down a button to hold their breath to pass by. That was cut because the team found people playing actually held their breath in real life, and they were genuinely worried that prolonged sessions would have caused actual medical problems. VR support for Resident Evil 7 wasn't confirmed until around E3 2015, after the game's other design elements were already in place and more than 2 years after development officially began in 2013. Level designer Tadahiro Miyazaki said, "To be completely honest, it didn't affect the game's level design much at all, as by that time most major decisions were already made and strategies were already in place. But one of the biggest difficulties in implementing VR, according to game designer Hajime Horiuchi, was ensuring that movement speed wasn't too fast to make sure players wouldn't get motion sickness." Capcom hoped that the ringing of the telephone would be as iconic as the typewriter. Audio designer Wataru Hachisako was really pleased with the way the telephone sound turned out, especially the way it would emanate and seemingly cut right through a room. He's also said he enjoyed implementing crunching footfall sounds, which do a lot to bring the environment to life.
You did good, Ethan.
"We're very aware that the sound of the typewriter was something very iconic for the franchise," Hachisako told us. "This time around, because the structure of saving is the cassette tape, we wanted to take every aspect and every sound that a cassette recorder could make and apply it to the game as much as possible. For example, the main menu when you're scrolling through the options, those are all sounds that a cassette recorder can make. So we tried to push that to the forefront." The idea for the bakers came about when the team tried to imagine what monsters in real life would be like. Game director Koshi Nakanishi said, "What we really wanted to strive for was what if we were to meet a monster in real life? What would they be? And if you were to meet a monster in real life, it would be a terrifying experience, even if it's a one-on-one encounter." We also felt that as Resident Evil progressed, the enemies were more frequent, more abundant, but at the same time, that almost lessened them, almost cheapened the feel of each encounter. We looked back and thought, okay, what is a Resident Evil adversary all about? What do those encounters mean? At the end of the day, each adversary should represent a fear, something that means when you encounter them, you are scared. At the same time, because you're scared, when you do overcome them, you feel a greater sense of triumph. And the bakers do represent different threats. Lucas with his deadly puzzles, Marguerite with her insect swarms, and Jack with his vicious brute strength. Speaking of Jack, scenario designer Masamori Sato is a big Stephen King fan, and has confirmed via a special making-of video that Jack Baker is named after both Jack Torrance from The Shining and Jack Nicholson, who plays him in the film adaptation. Brings a whole new meaning to this scene in particular. The team really enjoyed making the VHS tape segments. Scenario designer Sato called them a very fun and liberating experience where they were able to try something new. The team were able to go outside the boundaries of the main story campaign and try out not only different types of gameplay, but they were able to offer, on a narrative level, different perspectives and different personalities. Sato told us that it was a different, more exciting take on what they were used to doing, and the perspective shift to first person allowed them to draw inspiration from found footage films like The Blair Witch Project and Cloverfield. As detailed in a behind-the-scenes documentary with director Koshi Nakanishi, the team actually went and filmed at a number of supposedly haunted locations around Osaka with a GoPro, and the experience, which they saw as a test of courage, fed into how they interpreted and designed the VHS segments. Some members of the team weren't convinced that the first-person perspective would work until they made an internal prototype build and tried it for themselves. In 2013, there was an earlier version of Resident Evil 7 that was much more like the action-oriented approach of Resident Evil 5 and 6. But according to producer Masachika Kawata, it just wasn't coming together until executive producer Jun Takeuchi came on board and decided to change it all up, switching to first person and placing horror once again at the forefront, basically merging classic Resident Evil elements with more modern techniques. It was his idea to make a short first-person demo. I had faith in the direction, he told us. So I just wanted to say, look, let's make an internal build and we'll make a first playable version. Take a look and I think that'll reassure you. Lo and behold, he continued, once we had the game up and running and once people could actually get their hands on it and say, oh, okay, they had a moment of realization that it would all be okay. We can actually proceed with this because our concerns were, I'm not going to say invalid, but they weren't justified. As long as we can make the game the way we want to make it, it will still be Resident Evil no matter what the camera angle is. They almost ran out of receptionists to test the game on. According to various members on the development team, you get to a point in making a horror game where you just get kind of used to it and you don't know whether it's even scary anymore. Even Kitchen, which Capcom says has been responded to as one of the scariest things it's ever made, the team weren't sure before live testing it if it was actually scary. We were just blind to it at that point, Takeuchi told us. He said they often know logically that it should be scary because they have enough experience to put the parts together for a scary scene and they know in their minds that it does add up to being scary. But the emotional part they were kind of beyond checking. So the team would sometimes ask for admin guys or a receptionist to come up and try a scene to see whether they would be sufficiently scared or shocked. Takeuchi also went on to say that it was good they finished the game when they did, as they'd very nearly run out of unwitting victims in the building to test their scenes on.
Do something!
They feel like they held back on a lot of the gore. You might have noticed while playing that Resident Evil 7 was pretty heavy on the violence, with lots of legs, arms and heads being severed over the course of its runtime. According to Takeuchi, the team could have gone further. We often felt ourselves reaching the line and you ask yourself, am I going to cross this line or not, he said. I think we've even held back on some of the scenes you describe, which by the way was the hand meet chainsaw and the cop head meet shovel scenes. I think those are almost the cut back version of what we really wanted to do. But by and large, we have tried to have as much creative freedom as we can with this game. We did want to let casual players get on board with Resident Evil 5 as well and not scare them off. So we kind of held back sometimes on those titles where it was like, well, this level of intensity of gore is just going to put off a casual player completely. But I think with 7, putting aside that more business decision of put this in and it'll sell less, we've tried to let ourselves run rampant creatively. This is the kind of horror we want to show you. So by and large, we've gone to the line we want to go to, rather than be told we've crossed a line.
Do me a favor and stay dead.
Resident Evil 7 is kind of Chris Redfield's fault. Takeuchi also described the moment he realised Resident Evil 7 needed to scale back from the action-packed excesses of previous Resident Evil titles. Takeuchi, who worked on Resident Evil 5, says that the game was a big step towards being able to develop something like Resident Evil 7, because it was the first time players had seen Chris Redfield in a while, and as a result, he was made into a big hero. I think I realised in retrospect, the process of developing Chris into a hero character is not the same process of developing a Resident Evil game, he explained. I think we made a great game and people enjoyed it. We were able to marry the concept of co-op action and survival horror as best we could, but I do think there was more we could have done to make it moment to moment scarier. I do think back now and I'm like, we made Chris into a hero so successfully that it's like a zero-sum thing. The more you get of one, the less you get of the other. Thinking back on that, Chris taught me a lot about what I needed to do next with the series, and that's really been able to be translated into what you've seen today with Resident Evil 7. The team made a list of moments from past Resident Evils that scared them the most. When Capcom first started development on the new and improved Resident Evil 7, director Koshi Nakanishi says they sat down and made a list of all the core experiences that they personally felt really made a Resident Evil title. Experiences that were central to what it meant for a game to truly be Resident Evil. The examples that made the cut, such as not knowing what's in the next room, being scared and bracing yourself to open a door, knowing that there's probably a jump scare ahead and not wanting to take another step forward, having a lack of ammo, figuring out when to use an item and when to hold on to it, trying to figure out item management, all these things were elements that they then resolved to work into the final game. The team thought it was an opportunity to make the ideal vision of the original Resident Evil. Producer Masachika Kawata, who has worked at Capcom since 1995, said that for him, what really stood out was how developing Resident Evil 7 felt like the team were able to achieve almost the ideal image of what Resident Evil 1 could have been. Given its impressive level of immersion with photorealistic environments that players are able to travel through in a first-person perspective. A lot of the photo scanning of buildings and objects, by the way, actually took place on location in Louisiana, according to Toshihiko Tsuda, 7's art director. With all the latest technology, Kawata said, it was cool to be able to say, here's that very, very original concept, that original vision from the very beginning. Director Koshi Nakanishi has said that Evil Dead was a major influence on the design of the game, as it was similarly set in one intimate, remote location with a very small cast for the entire duration. You can pick out a very small reference to the cult classic near the beginning of the game, when Jack picks up a chainsaw during his basement fight with Ethan. According to a making-of documentary, the family were going to have a pet dog called Diane. Judging by the concepts shown on screen during this revelation, Diane would have been a German Shepherd, and Nakanishi says that she would have showed up during the infamous dinner scene. Although it would have been cool to see, and a nice throwback to both the zombie dogs and the Cerberus enemies of earlier games, yes, those are two separate things, a part of me is glad she didn't make the cut. Having to shoot a realistically rendered family dog, whether she'd been possessed or not, would have been heartbreaking. Speaking of that dinner scene, it originally depicted Jack and Marguerite as being much more loving towards one another. In order to make the scene as uncomfortable and shocking as possible, however, Takeuchi says the team decided to portray their relationship as much more confrontational and unpleasant. But to really get an idea of how this iconic scene would play out, the team decided to act it out for themselves, while filming from the player's viewpoint. The in-game end result is remarkably close to what they managed to film that day. A special shout out to director Nakanishi playing Jack, and of course, the paper cockroaches. So, which of the cut concepts would you have saved if you had the chance? What did you love, or what would you have changed about the final game? As always, let us know in the comments, and do like and subscribe to Eurogamer if you enjoyed this video. And we'll definitely be digging into Resident Evil 7 again, so do let us know if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see. Thanks for watching.
So, Hillbilly Joe and his family go missing.
Not hillbillies, the Bakers. Jack and Marguerite Baker. And they were quiet, not backward. A lot of bad rumors about their son, Lucas. Bad seed, apparently.
Ah, shit!